Oops.
All right. Let's see here. Looks like we should be going live here any minute.
I see it on your channel.
Perfect. It looks like we are live. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Germinal, for coming on. How have you been doing today?
I've been fine. Doing my same thing, learning,
Yeah.
working, and learning.
Oh, man. So what exactly are you focusing on right now currently?
So I've been focusing on econometrics and statistics.
Okay.
Because as an economist, you have to be able to test your hypothesis. And in economics, the way we test our assumptions or hypotheses is through the use of statistical techniques. That's why we have that word called econometrics, which means econo is economic theory, metrics is measurement. So it's the measurement of economic theory.
Gotcha.
So I do not have a scientific background initially. I'm more like a literary guy. I studied political science in school. That is my formation or my profession. I'm a trained political scientist, but I am passionate about economics. And so the way I got into economics at first was to read about Austrian economics, Ludwig von Mises, Hayek, all these guys. So they explain economics in a philosophical way, which is good when it comes to get the foundation. So at least you understand the fundamental concept, the economic principles and laws of the discipline. So once you get into that, now you want to get into economic analysis. And that's when the battle of methodology takes place. And to be considered seriously and professionally by everyone as a real economist, you have to be able to use empirical tools such as mathematics, such as statistics. So these two are the tools that we use in economic analysis. Today, if you just go to people and say, I'm an economist, I analyze economics with praxeology, people will laugh at you. People will be like, what are you talking about? Praxeology is just good when it comes to establishing the foundations. Like when you establish your assumptions, you say, this thing happened because of that. That's the assumption. And then now you want to validate your assumption. You want to prove that your assumption is right. And that's when now you use mathematical tools such as calculus, topology, or statistics to validate, or should I say, to authenticate that assumption.
Right, that makes sense, because if you don't do that, it's all just like speculation, and you could be right, but you would never be sure.
Exactly, and that has been my big issue with Austrians. For especially when I say Austrians, like it's too vague. Should I say Austrians of those who support praxeology, or if you're not familiar with the term, I would say a priori rationalism.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's basically logical deductions. It's like you go from an axiom, which is a first principle, and then you make deductions from that first principle. You build on that. Yeah. So
that makes sense. And that sounds like it is good for like hypothesis, but not for actually establishing the theory.
Exactly. Yeah. It's good like to establish an hypothesis, but it's not good to, I would not say it's not good. It's not sufficient to be used as a tool of analysis to come to a conclusion. That's where the math comes into play.
Right. No, that makes sense. So given all of that, how exactly would you summarize your economic positions? I know that's a broad question.
Yeah. No, it's fine. I mean, technically, I'm a classical liberal. I believe in a market order, in a market system. I believe in private property the way a Christian believes in Jesus, or the way a Muslim believes in Muhammad. To me, private property is cardinal, fundamental. Without private property, I made a post a couple of days ago on my Instagram saying that without private property, you just don't have an economy. Your economy won't last, it won't function properly because people need to be able to exchange in the market what they own. That's why we have private property, because when you have property, only you know how you use the resources you own.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say, I know some classical liberal like beliefs would be open, or at least more open borders, free trade. Is that like, are those all tenets of what you believe?
So here I'm giving my economic, specifically economic perspective. When it comes to open borders, I mean, it has an economic impact because at the end, the economic is based on people. It's people who make up the economy. We see with COVID, everybody was locked down, and you see what happened. GDP completely collapsed. So yes, I mean, immigration has a strong role to play when it comes to economic growth. But I'm in favor of free trade. Of course, I am in favor of, as I said, of a market process. I do not believe in government intervention.
Okay.
I believe the market is more efficient at allocating resources, but I do believe that the government still has a role to play, and its role is to ensure that people have the right to property. Is to ensure that the infrastructures are set in place so that people can use their resources in the labor market to create the wealth.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so that's what the government's supposed to do. Because, for instance, that's one of the disagreement I have with anarchists. They say the market can take care of everything, but what about property? Who define what property is? What if a plane is flying, I don't know, 20 feet above your house? Is it violating your property? How can you determine that?
Right.
That's why, right? So that's why we need here a government to establish a government is naturally coercive, and it's because it is naturally coercive that it should be minimized, but it doesn't mean that it is useless. It's useful, but since its usefulness is coercive, that's why we have to use it in a very efficient way and in a very limited way. We're like, okay, you're just here to do that and that's it. But of course,
makes sense.
Since the government is also made up of men, because the government is not a separate substance. It's government. It's part of society. It's made up of human beings. So of course, human beings always, when you give them your hand, they want to take your arm. So the people who are in the government, they're supposed to just apply those principles, but human beings are selfish by nature, so they come and they implement laws that would benefit them. And that's the trap we're in today, unfortunately.
Right. So I know there's like a theory, especially with free speech, that if you just allow free speech unfettered, what would happen is that the most aggressive speech would come out dominant, and then the rest of the people would be silenced. My question is there something like that with free trade and monopolies? And how would that, I guess, play out if you start having monopolies? Does that actually take away from free trade, or is that something that would need to actually happen and the government should not intervene in?
So Adam Smith warned us against monopolies in The Wealth of Nations. We have monopolies because we have state capitalism. State capitalism, or as we call it, crony capitalism, is when the government is deciding who has access to private property. I mean, there is private property, but it is difficult for some to have access to private property than others. Because the ones who have the power, like today it's big techs, they're the one who therefore influence politicians to pass laws that will give them the advantage of monopolizing the market. So it is hard for the small and the mid-sized business to keep up. They have to pay a lot of fees, a lot of taxes, It's like, let me make this analogy. Look, let's see, for instance, the political market. The political market, you have Democrats and Republicans. We have a duopoly, right?
Right.
Dominated by these two parties. Someone who runs for the Republican Party, let's say in his local town, maybe needs 500 signatures to get on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
But someone who runs as a libertarian will need probably 4,000. Where's the fairness here? You see? Why?
Yeah.
Because the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, both of them are the one dominating the market. So they implementing laws that make it difficult for the small guy. So for the Libertarian or for the Democratic Socialist Party or for whatever party, for whatever third party, to adequately compete with them. If you're a Republican or a Democrat, all you need is 500 signatures. Sorry, and then if you're a Democratic Socialist, if you want to run on the Democratic Socialist platform, or if you want to run as a Libertarian on the Libertarian platform, you have to get like 3 times the signatures that they're asking. That's not
Right.
fair, and that's how state capitalism works. State capitalism is not pro-market; it is pro-business. It is pro-corporation. There's a huge difference between being pro-market and being pro-business.
Okay. Interesting. You brought up kind of like the concept of inequality. So in the climate that we are in today with like politics, we see like a stark difference between many Black Americans and many white Americans. With like, the Black Americans, I know I've read statistics where they say that they have about like 5% of the wealth that white Americans have. Would they be able to like compete fairly in a free market basis where we are today, or would that be more of like an idealistic perspective?
Well, first of all, we don't have a free market. You know that we have crony capitalism.
Right.
True free market system, yes. Let's go back a little bit in the 19th century. Despite that slavery was a legal institution, there were some Black people that were actually very rich. And they were competing with whites who were also wealthy. I mean, with, Black Wall Street got destroyed and stuff like that. But when Black Wall Street was existing, Black people were extremely organized. They were creating the wealth. They were creating businesses. They were creating new markets. They were competing with white folks. I mean, that one, it was just pure jealousy. White felt, it was pure prejudice. White felt threatened that, these Negroes are going to take over if we don't do anything about it. So we have to put a stop to that. And that's what they did. But if that part didn't happen, it would have been, Black people would have been as wealthy as white people, because the market is colorblind. It's a voluntary action. If I want to sell you something, Carissa, and you don't want it, I'm not going to put a gun on your head and say, if you don't get it, I kill all your family. You don't get it, well, the transaction doesn't take place. That's all. It's voluntary. If you decide to purchase it, that means that there's a voluntary action. That means that we agreed to a price. You give me the money, I give me the product that you're purchasing, and everybody's happy. Simple as that.
Right. How would you, I guess, answer? So that would be like in an ideal like market economy, but in the economy we are in now, does this require government like intervention to level the playing fields, or how would you like recommend to make this fair?
It's the government is the one responsible for the condition of Black people right now. That's why I explain it in my book, The Economic Condition of Black America. By the way, if you don't mind me, let me get it so that you can promote it also to your audience.
Of course, definitely.
So yes, I explain it here in this book, The Economic Condition of Black America in the 20th century. I say that it was in fact the political process that impeded that impeded the economic advancement of Black people. Because here's the thing: the role of the government has always been to protect life, liberty, and property. We say the pursuit of happiness, but that's just pure rhetoric. It's just to make people feel good, but it's property. Because to be happy, you need to have, if you don't own anything, how can you pursue things? So, and when Black people were freed, the government said, okay, you're free, but they had no skills. There was no program of apprenticeship to make them learn the skills that they need in order to build their own community. That didn't happen. The government said, oh, you're free. So those who were in the South, they were now coerced by local and state government laws. And the 10th Amendment says that anything that is not stipulated in the Constitution is left to local and state government to make their decisions. But in 1868, the 14th Amendment was established, which gives the right to the federal government to protect the right of minorities. So the 14th Amendment basically made minorities full legal citizens like white people, right? And then the 15th Amendment gave the right to minorities to vote. So Black people have the right to vote since the 19th century. The civil rights movement, the civil right of 1964, Black people had the right to vote since. And it was the role of the federal government to uphold these two amendments. That's why when the local or the state government unjustly violates your right, not even unjustly, because if there's a violation, it's already unjust. So when those two governments violate your right, that's when you seize the Supreme Court of the United States. Because the Supreme Court of the United States is the highest court of the land. And it is a branch of the federal government. The Supreme Court of the United States is supposed to protect the rights of people, no matter what the skin color is, no matter what their racial background, their ethnic background is. And in 1896, Plessy v. Ferguson, the federal Supreme Court of the United States says equal, separate but equal is constitutional. So Black people were oppressed, greatly oppressed in the South. And the federal government did nothing, absolutely nothing. And at the same time, in the late 19th century, so 1870 through the beginning of the 20th century, there was a mass immigration from Europe. And when Europeans came, the federal government gave them land. Because at the time, the United States was still an agricultural society. It was starting to transform itself. It started to industrialize itself, but it was still then an agricultural society. So white people at least have access to land to create wealth, to build something. Black people had nothing. So whose fault is it?
It's the government's fault.
Right? Whose fault is it? If the government simply protect Black people, if they upheld the 14th and the 15th Amendment, Black people will not be in that deep trouble they are today, economically speaking, at least.
I know a lot of people make the point, they acknowledge that it's the government's fault for where Black people are today in society, but they like to say that if they push programs to help out Black people, then it actually will make the problem even worse, and that the government should just stay out of it now. What would you suggest as a practical solution for today for Black America?
Well, my practical solution is simple: education. Education is the most powerful tool on earth. Let me give you this example. Look at Asian Americans. Asian Americans are the wealthiest. They're the wealthiest community in America. Maybe Jewish Americans. Jewish people, they've always been the wealthiest wherever they are. Why? But because they're organized. Because they're organized, because they invest in education. Look at since we're speaking about Jewish people, right? Jewish people start learning the Torah at a very early age, the Torah and the Talmud.
Mm-hmm.
And learning these holy scripts requires a substantial intellectual effort to understand that. Jewish people are, there is a myth that says that Jewish people are the smartest people on earth.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't born smart. It's just that they engage into intellectual activity more intensely than others. That's all. And they started at a young age. A normal 8-year-old or 9-year-old kid will want to play soccer or whatever sport with his friends. But a conventional Jewish kid would be in his room reading
Mm-hmm.
or writing.
Right.
So, and you see, so when those guys go to, when they mature, they grow up and they go to college, their IQ is significantly higher than the average guy. And then those are the ones who go win Nobel Prizes and have a prestigious award because, and Jewish, for instance, were never farmers. Why? Because systems were designed against them so that they cannot use agriculture. So Jewish were always in positions of management. So that's why they were good at businesses. That's why they were good at creating businesses, at reducing unemployment through that. And the Asians did the same too. Today, look at Asians. Asians understood that education is key. When you look, the typical Asian kid, give him a standardized test. What is he going to do? He's going to study as long as it takes just to make sure to take that test once and we'll get a perfect score.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
You see how funny it is? And there was even a lawsuit 2 years ago at Harvard because Harvard discriminated against Asian Americans. Harvard says like, okay, you guys coming and take all the spots. Like we need to let other people eat. But Asians say, hey, we're working.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry if we get the best scores, it's because we put the work. You can't unjustly say that we're not allowed to come to Harvard just because you want to implement some affirmative action laws to let people who didn't put the work that we did to be where we are today. I mean, honestly, it's fair.
Mm-hmm. I have
go ahead.
No, okay. I have a follow-up question with that. I've talked to some people who are a little further on the left, and their perspective on affirmative action is that because like Black people are so underprivileged, especially when it comes to school systems, if they do get like a much higher than average score, if not like even if it's not perfect on a standardized test, they are working as hard, if not harder, than those Asian Americans, and therefore should be let in to Harvard. What is your perspective on that take?
I don't agree because Asians are human beings like us.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that Asians are naturally intellectually superior to Blacks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that. We are all human beings. We all have 46 chromosomes. Mm-hmm. Only apes have 48. So apes have a different brain structure than we do.
Right.
But no matter what you're Irish, Greek, Russian, Japanese, Korean, Afghan, Brazilian, Argentinian, Congolese, no matter what your nationality is, we all have 46 chromosomes, which means that we all have the ability to generate thoughts. We all have the ability to learn. We all have the ability to engage into intellectual activities. Now, the difference is that there's some people who are willing to sit down for a long time in studying and others are not. And that's what Asians do. Asians are extremely disciplined.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like having a better education system in order to push them to do that just leads down like a more systematic or systemic advantage, or do you think that just the fact that they have the same capabilities means that they should be able to, I guess, place similarly on like standardized tests and etc.?
No, so first of all, I think standardized tests should be maintained. Second of all, we need to change the system. We need to change the way we teach people. Everything is a matter of approach. I don't know if you heard that before, but there is a dictum that says The third most important person in your life is your teacher after your parents. Why? Because the teacher is the one that actually impacts your judgment on a field of study. You see someone saying, I want to study law because maybe you had a teacher in high school that made you love history and politics. And then you see someone say, oh, I hate math, because not because math is necessarily difficult. I mean, math is not easy. I mean, you study math, but the point is that it's based, if the teacher is not teaching well the subject, you're not going to like it. So it's all about the teachers, and that's where the issue is. We have to today, like, the teaching profession is unionized, so teachers don't see the point of giving their best to inculcate knowledge in those kids' heads. They come, they just clock in, do whatever they do with the bare minimum, clock out, and get their paycheck at the end of the year, at the end of the month, or every 2 weeks, whatever, how much they pay. That, like, that doesn't matter. But that's the thing. That's why we need charter schools. Charter schools will give the opportunity to low-income individuals to have a better education. Charter schools are public schools that are privately managed. But the government doesn't want that, because the government wants to have control over the management of the educational system. And that's where the problem is.
Interesting. That makes sense. I think that actually goes well into my next question about, oh, I'm sorry, I might have lagged a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now, yeah.
That actually goes well into my next question about policies. What democratic policies would you say fails the Black community the most?
When you say democratic, you mean about the Democratic Party?
Yes.
Oh, the welfare state and the crime bill of 1994. Absolutely. And the redlining policies. Oh, absolutely. And when it comes to tough on crime laws, that is not just Democrats, it's also Republicans too, because Nixon was a Republican and he implemented tough on crime laws to subjugate Black people, to keep them as second-class citizens. I talk about that in the book. Absolutely. So in this book, I genuinely blame both parties. I say it's the political process. It's not just one party. It's the entire political process, whether you're Democrat or Republican. Each of these guys that took power did not genuinely implement laws to improve Black people's lives. If they implement some laws that improve Black people's lives, they did it for political calculations. They did not do it because they love Black people. Let's be honest. They didn't do it because they're altruistic guys. They did it because it will serve their political purpose. That's it. Other than that, no.
So would you say that your position is that if you get rid of teacher unions, if you ramp up the quality of the education, that you will see the inequality between like races diminish like more and more? Is that your position?
Yeah, like I mean, not necessarily get rid of the teachers union. I think people have the right to unionize if they want to, but the problem is that now the unions have too much power. It's just that it's important to make it a little difficult for unions to do whatever they want. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that we should abolish the unions. I don't think so. People have the right to unionize.
Right.
At the end of the day, like, it's important to remain nuanced. Like, life is not radical. It's never black or white. It's always gray. Life is a cycle, and there is always a time when also union can be beneficial to some extent. So I will not say that we should abolish the unions, but I think we should make it a little more difficult for unions to do whatever they want. And it's because unions are too powerful today, they can do whatever they want, that teachers in the union don't care. Because today you will see, like, if you go in most, I would even say all black neighborhoods, low income black neighborhoods, one kid out of two wants to become an entertainer, whether it's a rapper, whether it's an athlete, whatever. But they will never say that they want to to engage into intellectual activities. Why? Not because they're stupid, but their parents don't inculcate that to them. The parents don't tell them that you need to go to school and get the education you need and the knowledge you need to become competitive in the labor market. No, because those kids, that's all they know. They watch BET, Black Entertainment Television. They see those rappers, and they think that that's how success is. And to me, like that's not what it is. So it's important that we change the system so that those kids would want to become educated. When I say educated, I'm not saying they need to have a PhD. No, all they need is to study something that will make them marketable in the labor market. To study a skill that will make them competitive. And I also one way to incentivize Black people to improve themselves is to advocate for STEMs, to advocate for science, because high demand skills are in science.
Right.
A society gets developed by science, by the scientific method. Technology doesn't happen through literature.
True.
It doesn't. It happens through statistics. It happens through mathematics, through engineering. That's how you develop a society. And we discussed that yesterday. I'm doing a certificate in statistics through Coursera, so that I can, once I get that, I can have that marketable skill and work as a data analyst, econometrician, or statistician, basically. So, like, because today the world is data driven, and data science, statistics, economics, these are the high demanded jobs.
Right.
You see kids, they go to college, they study literature, and then what happened? They work at Starbucks. People don't care if you know how to write. People care about if you know how to manipulate numbers.
Right. That makes sense. What would you say the left misunderstands the most about, I guess, the inequalities that exist?
What the left misunderstand is that they think that by giving a fish to an individual, that person will be free, instead of teaching that individual how to fish. If that makes sense. Because that famous thing, like, give a man a fish for a day, he will be dependent for the rest of his life, and teach a man how to fish and will be free for the rest of his life. Something like that. I mean, I don't know if I say it correctly, but the content is the same. So, yeah. And they think that by giving handouts, they help people. Maybe they do it genuinely thinking that it helps, but some do it for self-congratulations. Thomas Sowell talked about it in A Conflict of Visions. They implement self-congratulation policies. All these welfare policies they implement is to make themselves feel better. Oh, I'm altruistic. I love people. I help people. Oh my God. It's to congratulate themselves. It's not because they genuinely care. So I'm sure there's some people on the left who do genuinely care, but the method is not the right one. When you want to free someone, you want to help someone becoming independent, teach them the tools they need to become independent. Do not give them stuff. If you notice that when you drive around, you see people on the street asking for money, you give them money, the next day you drive and you see that same person asking again, well, so what did he do with that money you gave him yesterday? You see, like it doesn't help.
On the other side of it, what would you say the most common misconceptions are from the right?
The right, how can I put it? So basically, it's like asking how Republicans fail Black people too, right? What the right doesn't understand about the Black community is that the Black community at the end of the day remains a communitarian community. Like we are communitarian people. We do things in groups. At the end of the day, the way we think in the Black community, and when I say Black community, it's not just in America, but in Black civilization, in Africa too. Whatever you do, when you become successful, you have to understand that the success you've achieved is not just through your own efforts. It's because people have pushed you to be where you are today. So you have to be mindful and grateful of those who have helped you reach the level you're at today. And the Republicans, they're preaching that false narrative of individualism all the time. Individualism is good. I'm a huge individualist, but it's important to understand that human beings are substance that originated from groups. It doesn't mean that your faith belongs to a group. Your faith doesn't belong to a group. Your faith belongs to you. You're the master of your faith. But you're not just like a substance in the middle of nowhere. You come from somewhere. That's where I feel like Republicans don't understand about Blacks. Like they preach individualism and stuff. It is good, but they need to understand about Black culture. Black culture remains a communitarian culture. It's like the Asian community too. When Asians do things, they don't just do things for themselves. They do it for their family. They do it for their surroundings. They do it for the people who live in the town with them. So what Black people need to do in order to improve themselves is to invest in the community. We call that group economics. Everybody's been through that, group economics. That's how you help it. That's how a society grows. If there are people within the community who are entrepreneurs, who own businesses, support them financially. But one issue that Black people have is that whenever they have the money, they go buy Ralph Lauren's and all these nonsense stuff that are owned by whites or by other races. So the money, instead of staying in the community for as long as it has to, it comes in the hand of Blacks and then it leaves immediately. But look at Asians. Asians will support the local Asian business. They will purchase Asian products. The money stays at least for quite a while before it gets out. It's the same with Jewish people. That's what they've been doing. But Blacks, it comes in, it comes out immediately. How can we build generational wealth when the money doesn't stay in the community? So group economics is extremely important for Blacks and for any community anyways, because no community can prosper if you spend the money you make in another community instead of spending that money in your own community. So this is something that we have to work on.
That's really interesting. I find whenever I talk to someone, they tend to who is like further on the right, they tend to think that a Black person's decision or individuals in the Black community make all of their decisions on an individual basis, which yes, it's true. Everyone's accountable for their own actions, but things influence those decisions. And that's where I feel like there's so much of a disconnect where it's as if you bring it down.
And this is one of my big issues with the right is that they don't understand that because something doesn't happen to you, so it doesn't exist. When, for instance, they talk about systemic racism is a myth. It's not a myth. It is real. It is real. I mean, I've personally never been subjected to racism in this country, thank God. But it happens. Like people are victim of that. So it's no joke. Now the thing is it because of racism that you do not thrive in your life? Now that's a different issue, and I do not believe so. Right? I do not believe so. It's to say when Candice Owen says, for instance, oh, white privilege is a myth. Excuse me? White privilege is a myth? Is to say that slavery never existed in this country? Is to say that Jim Crow never existed in this country? Is to say that eugenics never existed in this country? Because that's what a myth is. A myth is something, it's a story that you tell that never existed.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I actually have an entire video on that on my channel about white privilege.
Well, yeah, like it's real, it exists, but it's no longer a factor in the social and economic advancement of Black people. That's
other than like the education part of it, that kind of
Yeah, it's just that like Black people, the Black community needs like a family structure. They need guidance. There's a lack of fathers. There's a lack of parental guidance and discipline that will tell them that are the steps you need to take in order to be successful in life. That's all. That's what is missing.
Right.
But not like, oh, slavery never existed in this country. Like, come on.
And I definitely agree with that. So you do have stuff like redlining that still do affect Black communities, and it seems to be like very ingrained, where you have like the housing market is just under, or I guess deflated in those communities. Is there something that the government should do in order to reverse that, or should they let like the education system, I guess, fix that over time on its own?
Well, I'm going to return you the question: who created redlining policies in the first place?
The government.
So why all of a sudden they will come and fix what they created themselves?
Right.
So that answers your question. It's not the government, of course not. They create all of that. The government is responsible for all of that.
So how do we fix it?
It takes time. It's generational. As I said, everything starts from within. People need to be educated. They need to be financially literate. They need to understand financial literature and stuff like that. That's how they will be able to infiltrate, like, for instance, the real estate market and other markets. But because without that, without a substantial understanding of the market itself, we can thrive. So it's very simple. Like, as I said, it's important that we invest in education. Well, and I repeat again, when I say education, I am not saying people should have a master's or a PhD. What people need is to be educated enough to have the skills that will make them competitive in the labor market, and they can create the wealth. That's what people need. Absolutely. So it's through education that we can thrive and nothing else. Oops. Oh.
I apologize. I apologize very much about that.
Oh, no worries. I was like, oh, what happened? I was surprised for a bit.
That totally makes sense what you're saying, with the education and the importance of education. One other question I would like to ask is about like a common phrase that you hear a lot, especially in the more far right circles. And I'm sure you've heard it, the 1350 statistics. So what would you say in response to Black people commit 50% of the crime despite making up 13% of the population? What would your response be?
To basically the Black on Black crime?
Or just the crime in society, since they make up only 13% of the population, but I think they're arrested, and they're arrested 50% for 50% of the number of arrests are from the Black community.
But here's the thing: you watch my video, a historical analysis of racism. And I explain how racism actually was conceptualized and how it was passed down on. as I said, like there is a stigma that has been associated with black people.
Mm-hmm.
The mere fact that you're black, you're immediately associated with poverty and crime.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, a black person has to work twice as hard just to prove that he's not poor, he's not a criminal. So there is already a prejudice. So yes, no,
Right.
I mean, yes, black people kill each other, same as whites do.
So do white, yeah.
Yeah, so do whites. So like, it's that's not it, but it's important to recognize that this stigma on black people is still extremely relevant, and it's unfortunate. White
Right.
people may not be racist, but let's say two white person walk on the street, they see a black guy with dreads and a hat, they're going to change street. I mean, it's that's what it is.
Yeah.
Immediately they assume that the guy is already a criminal or
Yeah.
he's about to commit something to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even that they think about it, it's just happened.
Right.
So it's unfortunately a cultural stigma that American society has put it on blacks. So I don't have yet a concrete solution that I could propose on my hand.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's, as I said once again, it's education. Like people,
Mm-hmm.
whites also need to educate themselves about black history because
Mm-hmm.
black people cannot continue to teach whites about those things.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
whites have to make their own effort and be like, hey, like let's learn about the history too. Like if they don't do that, is that same vicious cycle is still gonna keep going.
Right. No, that makes sense. Another thing I have heard is the idea that Asians came over and they were discriminated
They
against for
were,
a
yeah.
while. And what I've been asked before, I'm curious about what your response would be, but I've been asked, if they were discriminated against and they're doing better than white people are doing right now, why is it that Black people haven't been able to get to that level yet?
Because they're not disciplined enough, in my opinion. And that I've been saying, and I've been arguing with black people about that. I say, guys, yes, slavery happened, yes, Jim Crow happened, but you cannot keep using this thing as the justification for why up to now you're still not thriving.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is that the black community lacks leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, we had Martin Luther King and Malcolm X as the intellectual leaders. Today, when George Floyd died, look at the leaders that went to represent the black community. It was T.I. and Big Mike.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no, Big Mike is a very intelligent guy. He's a very knowledgeable guy, but he doesn't reflect that intellectual leadership that the community needs.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, you have like Martin Luther King. He was a doctor.
Right.
He was that intellectual leader. You have Malcolm X, who was a preacher. He was going in places and educate black people. That was his job. That was his living. You had Frederick Douglass, who was a speaker too, who was educating black people. You had Booker T. Washington. You even have W.E.B. Du Bois. All these guys were intellectual leaders of the black community. Today, the intellectual leaders of the black community, there are none. I mean, there's Thomas Sowell, but people are rejecting him. There is Walter Williams. Nobody's listening to him. Who's the leader? Al Sharpton?
Right.
You
No,
know, like the leaders of the black community are not listened. That's the thing, in fact. We have leaders. Thomas Sowell, Larry Sharp, Walter Williams, all these conservative intellectuals, but they're not listened because they do not go along with the black mentality. That's why they're rejected.
I have one last question for you. From, I guess, what I've noticed, and I want to see if you agree with me on this, people tend to either fall into two camps, and I also see this especially with more conservative Black people. where they have the idea of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but they do not recognize systemic racism, and they do not recognize that that those things exist and still contribute to the Black community. Or you have the other side where, again, what you were saying with like all the handouts, where it's just like, oh, we just need more social programs. Do you feel like the truth is just kind of more in the middle without
Always.
pragmatic
Always.
and just like, yes, we do recognize that it's still being influenced by systemic racism, but at the same time, you are accountable for your own actions. It's going to be
Yeah.
tough for you to get ahead. We should change the system of education, but you have like power within yourself as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is. You nailed it. Literally, that's what it is. It is in the middle. As I said, life is never black. I was a very radical guy. I was very dismissive back then. But and plus, since I've got into statistics, I start to understand what nuance is. You have to take all the variables. If we speak mathematically, we have to take all the variables into account.
Right.
Systemic racism is a variable. Handouts are a variable too.
Right.
So yes, it is in the middle. Yes, systemic racism has been playing a consequential role in American history. And that's why they create those social programs to help Black people. But the social programs also miserably failed to uplift Black people.
Right.
That's the real answer. Because the welfare state is in fact a response of the systemic racism. Okay, you have. I'm just finishing my argument.
No, you're fine.
You have so you have a system that has been oppressing a group of people, and this group of people has been so disadvantaged that we're going to create a system that will help them put themselves back in shape economically. So they create that system called the welfare state and all the handouts that come with. But those handouts, instead of lifting them up, encouraging them to actually thrive, if they say, oh, well, if I make after a certain amount, I cannot get those benefits, and I'm making money without even providing any effort, so why should I? So it incentivizes them to remain in poverty. So you see how one leads to the other and how the other fails. So it's in the middle. And in the middle, what you have to do is to create an educational system that will inculcate the values of personal responsibility, that will inculcate the value of knowledge, to pursue skills and stuff like that. And that's what is missing, because although there is systemic racism in this country, there are many Blacks who thrive in this country. I never seen racism as a problem for me. To me, I've never, first of all, I'm going to tell you this, and this is from a personal anecdote. I never felt white people were superior to me. Never. When I came in this country, I remember I was in the plane. It was August 2010. I was saying, I'm coming to crush everybody there. I'm not playing. Oh no, I came with that determination too. I'm like, I'm not going to come and cry, oh, this country is racist. I don't have time. I say, like, if you, I always told people, when you create value, even the racist person is obliged to respect you. Simple as that. If there were Black people who were able to be rich during slavery, when slavery was a legal institution, that means it is possible. But you cannot keep using slavery as a justification to justify your own failures. You can't. You have to stop using that. Yes, slavery had played a role, a psychological role in people's mind. I understand that, but you cannot keep using slavery and Jim Crow as the justification box to explain your own personal failures. At the end of the day, we live in 2020. We have access to resources that our parents did not have access to, and that is a fact. Today, I can educate myself online. As I've always told people, look at the difference between let's pick an Asian kid who's low income and a black kid who's low income. What I'm going to say is going to make a lot of black people mad, but I don't care. They need to hear this, so I'm going to say it anyways. You take the two of them, right? You give them $500. The black kid who lives in a low income neighborhood will go to the mall and buy things he doesn't need, such as a Gucci belt, a jacket, an expensive jacket, things he doesn't need. You give those same 500 to the Asian kid, is going to go on Coursera and purchase and invest in a certificate that in a couple months will make him marketable in the labor market, and he will get a job and make 80K a year. Simple as that. So everything is based on what you do with your life.
Right. I know I said one last question before, but this is my actual one last question.
No, I'm having fun, to be honest. So.
Me too. So from one perspective I've heard is that to, I guess, ask for the individuals to take responsibility in a public way kind of obfuscates from the systemic issue. And I'm going to give you an example of that, where like if I log on to Facebook and I see, someone, even sometimes Black people that say like racism doesn't exist anymore. We had a Black president and I make $100,000 a year. These people are crazy. You can just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And like, I guess you don't have to even get into all of like, you guys are crazy, but more like if you try to put the personal responsibility on the individual, do you feel like that would I guess kind of obscure the need for systemic change that we need in both the educational system and how the economy works in the Black community with keeping the wealth inside the Black community? What would your take be on that?
Wow, that was a long question. I don't even know how to start answering that.
No, I'm sorry. I just see that. I guess I see that a lot with people putting the onus on the individual, which I understand that. Yeah, like if I talk to someone individually, I'd be like, I know the system's stacked against you, but what you can do is take what you can and do with it as you can. But saying that publicly, is there a risk?
Yeah, especially coming from you, you're a white woman. Oh, absolutely, you be labeled ASAP. Mm-hmm. That's not even that's not even a question. You definitely be labeled ASAP. But that's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Black people overcame more adversity back then than now,
mm-hmm.
which is funny because back then when there was Jim Crow, that's when Black people actually wanted to thrive and go to school and make it in American society, where like they had schools that says like, oh, no Black is allowed. Like that's why people had to create HBCUs so that Black people could go. But now things have changed,
mm-hmm.
and with education that is also changing, it's being created remotely now compared to you have to go physically to the place and stuff like that. That's what I'm saying now. Like it would be for me to be harder to even make excuses anymore because, as I said, you have platforms where mm-hmm. you can genuinely teach yourself for cheap and and get the skill you need and apply for jobs. 20 years ago, sure, maybe you don't have the money to go to a good school and get a good education. Because yes, if you live in a neighborhood, unfortunately, you see, once again, the government is responsible because they assign, if you don't have the money to go to a private school, they assign you to the school in your neighborhood. And if you live in a low-income neighborhood that has a high crime rate, you see your education becomes worthless because the government school there, no one cares. Mm-hmm. It's not, as I say, like no one take care of the children there and they're basically doomed to fail. But today, as I said, now you have platforms like Coursera. Now many schools are offering online education where it's even cheaper. So now it's people who have to take advantage of that. Now you can come and say, oh, the system is against me. The poorest person in America, she has a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
And in a smartphone, when you open up, you have access to information in a fraction of a second. So it means that you have access to resources to improve yourself.
Right.
But
Would you?
you have to do it. We can't, like it's you have that possibility to do that our parents did not have. So people
Mm-hmm.
have to take advantage of this when they have to educate themselves one way or another.
Hmm. Do you think the mentality of feeling like you don't necessarily need to educate yourself could be another, I guess, result of systemic racism,
No.
because you don't have that education system, because your whole like society doesn't really push the importance for education because of social programs and etc. Could you argue that because you're not in like the same culture and family that like an Asian person would be, you are in a way disadvantaged?
Even if you are disadvantaged, sure, you could be disadvantaged, but does it mean that because you were born poor, you have to die poor?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Simple as that. My mom was born into a poor family.
Mm-hmm.
She did not have the advantages that rich kids do. She went to school. She got her law degree, and she's been working for the parliament of my home country for the past 20 years. My dad, same thing. My dad comes from a family of 7. He was the only one who became successful. He worked as a prosecutor for the UN. It didn't come from, it didn't fall off the sky. Like he just put the work. Yes,
Right.
you may be born poor, but it doesn't mean that you have to die poor either.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many people who are disadvantaged one way or another, but you cannot let your condition define you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So
No, that makes sense. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and you
no
had some
problem.
really, really interesting perspectives. I really appreciate that you do take more of a middle perspective. That's so rare.
Yeah, no, it's important to because my goal is to be as intellectually honest as possible. As a scholar, as an intellectual, my duty is to promote the truth. And you cannot pretend to educate people by being biased on every issue. I will always call out Republicans if I think that they're talking nonsense, like in this old no, it's true. Like they say, like they always laugh at liberals for saying that liberals are emotional when it comes to arguing policies, that they believe in logic and they rely on logic and statistics and facts, but they always cherry pick the facts that fits the narrative. That's not honest, in my opinion. So
No, it's not.
yeah, so like it's important, like the truth is always in the middle, because and the reason why the truth is always in the middle is because we all live different experience in life. Therefore, it will always be different for everybody. For that, the reason why some people hate capitalism is legitimate because the system hasn't worked for them. Although capitalism is the greatest, or should I say, the free market is the greatest economic system that was ever created by human beings. There's some people for whom the system didn't work, and that's why they like socialism. It's not because they're dumb. So it's important to understand the other side. You need to understand people's stories. Why? What has led them to be where they are today? People hold beliefs for a reason. They don't just hold those beliefs for the sake of holding them. It's because they've been through life. If some people still believe that America is a racist country, they have their reasons why. Maybe where they live, the system, they're always arrested for whatever they do. Maybe they're targeted by the police. If you don't go for instance on the south side of Chicago, how would you know what the guy who lives in the south side of Chicago feels? So do you see what I mean? Like it's important to be in the middle, always in the middle. Like You can't always be extra radical. It's either that or nothing. But there's one thing that I would never ever compromise on, is that socialism will always be a failure.
Well, I want to have you on again at a
Please
future
do.
point in time and talk about that, because that would be super interesting.
Absolutely.
Maybe after I read your book on socialism, that would be super cool. So thank you again for taking your time out of your busy day. And
Thank you very much, Carissa. Appreciate it.
well, have a great rest of your day then.
Thank you very much. And please send me the video once it's recorded and edited and everything.
100%. We'll do that. All
Thank
right.
you very much.
Have a good one.
You too.